Chris. So the topic which I'm going to be talking about today is, are they all engaging? So this is a question which I'm hoping by the end of the day, we're going to have, or by the end of my session, a better idea how to begin answering this sort of question when you're teaching. And before I move on to that, I want to use a reference back to something which I have done before. I know not all of you have been there, but for example, I think, Mark, you were here when I did that session. I wonder whether, Mark, if I say cold call, do you remember what that is? Or were you there for that? If you were, take yourself off mute and tell us.
So what, if you said what to me?
Cold call. I think you were there for that. I might be mistaken.
Cold call?
Yes.
I don't remember anything about the cold.
Okay, I'll bounce it from Mark to Dom. I believe Dom was there. Dom, what do you remember anything like that?
Yeah, so a cold call is where you ask for a volunteer to, instead of asking for a volunteer to answer a question, you nominate a student to answer a specific question.
Great, thank you so much, Dom. So I actually just did an example just there where, so normally you do that after doing a bit of teaching, it's to check some understanding. And rather than doing the classic teacher thing of like asking, so here's what a classic teacher thing would have been. I've been like, oh, so who can remember what cold call is? And then I wait, someone puts a hand up, say Neil puts his hand up. I'm like, oh, Neil, tell me what cold call is. Neil gives me a perfect definition. I'm like, amazing, everyone remembers. And then I move on. And cold call is a way of correcting for selection bias in that, because people who put their hand up, they're not representative, they're more likely to get it correct. And so you pick on people at random, and that gives you a better sense of to what extent there actually is some kind of awareness within class or what you're talking about. But cold call is a helpful technique, but it isn't a sort of perfect technique. So there are some limitations around it. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about what you think the main limitations of the cold call technique might be. So I just want you to think about it now. And if you have something ready, start typing in the chat, but I don't want you to send it just yet. So and sort of 30 seconds, have a think. If you think you've got something to say, type it out in the chat, but don't send just yet. Another 10 seconds. Okay, if you've got things which you can share, please stick it in the Zoom chat. So I see that we've got student shyness from Aaron. So I think that's sort of like, you might indeed have students who aren't used to this sort of thing, and they feel put in the spot, they feel quite shy. And the Esme, kind of that self-consciousness, it was sort of like, it's you're singling out people, and people feel like, oh, wow, there's this big magnifying glass on me. And that can be indeed discouraging, and Mark says. Then, so there's this, similar things in terms of like Hannah putting people on the spot. Neil kind of like, it might cause students not to show up unless it's established culturally. I think is a really important part. So definitely one of the things with cold call is to try and establish it culturally by using it frequently to make sure that people learn that actually it's okay, you say it, and you're not, it's okay to make a mistake. I think answer from, I'm going to call you Sherlock, P. Sherlock, your ability to move forward is based on whatever answer you receive. So indeed, it does depend on what you get back. Something which I think is interesting is this idea of like the sort of, when we do cold call, so I think lots of good things coming out of the answers here in terms of like, people might be uncomfortable, singles people out, which is definitely true. Another aspect of the singling out, which makes cold call imperfect, is singling out not from a perspective of maybe they're feeling uncomfortable, but singling out as in you only get data from one student, or maybe a handful if you bounce it around. But you're not getting data from the whole class. And therefore, cold call tells you, okay, this number of people, like they paying attention, they give me a certain answer, I know what they are thinking, and you might infer to the whole class, but you might make a mistake in making that inference. And so it doesn't necessarily tell you whether the whole class is engaging. And so that's something which I'm interested in trying to answer in this sort of session. How might we think about something like that? So the way that we might do that is slightly different in person to remote. So I'm going to tell you what this might look like in person in case we ever arrive at a world where we would do this in person, but also then what it looks like slightly remote as well. So I'll first describe the in-person thing, which definitely does not work remotely. But there's this idea of call and response, which is a way of building up energy in the class. And it's also a way of getting greater participation. So suppose we're in a maths lesson and we're doing some basic times tables or something like that. So what is 2 times 2, for example? It's maybe a question that I want to assess what the answer is. If I'm doing cold call, I might do something like this. I might go to, say, Esme, can you tell me what 2 times 2 is?
I think it's 4.
Fantastic, Esme. You superstar. And I'm like, great, the class knows how to do 2 times 2. If I were doing this in person, what call and response would look like is you need to establish it like a culture, much like cold call. The established expectation of like on 3, what's 2 times 2? 1, 2, 3, and then make some kind of gesture. And the idea is everyone shouts 4. And the first time you do this, people won't shout 4 because they'll be like, what is this? Like, what's going on? I don't know what this is. So it will catch people out surprised the first time you do this. And you're like, right, now we're going to do it again. What's 2 times 2? On 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I just noticed. Yeah. So but it doesn't quite work on Zoom because the Zoom audio thing, like it doesn't cope well with multiple people saying it at once. But the idea is then you might do like, what's 8 times 2? 1, 2, 3, and then 16 and so on like that. And if you can train this quite nicely in a class in person, it's actually quite fun because it's nice bits of like everyone doing it together. So it's not got that sort of magnifying effect where it's like I've picked on you as a single person and you feel like part of a whole, and that's actually quite nice. And also as you get quite a good idea of like what everyone, like how the class at large seems to be doing. Like if it's a nice clear 16 that comes back, great. If it's 16 but you hear a bit of 40 and a bit of like 20, then you're like, oh, this is something's going wrong here. So that's how you might do this really nicely in person. Doesn't work over Zoom, doesn't work remotely. There are ways we can get around that. So for example, the way that you might do that is through gestures, some sort of visible gestures. So actually for this next part, it'll be extremely helpful to me if you have your webcam on, because I'm directly going to be using that, or through things like emojis. So it might be Zoom kind of emoji responses, or it might be like Slack emoji responses or something like that. And I'm going to show this through an example where what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that I'm teaching you a bit about Boolean operators and maybe a bit about if statements. So let's assume that you already have an understanding of true and false. I'm now going to explain to you some of these Boolean operators. And we're going to start by looking at AND. So the AND operator is true when I have 2 things together which are true. So it connects 2 things, true and true is true, because this is checking whether both are true. But true and false is false, because in order for this whole thing to be true, it requires that both things be true. So false and true is also false. False and false is false. Both things are required to be true for the overall thing to be true. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to type something, and then I want you to nod if you think it's going to evaluate as true, shake your head if you think it's going to evaluate as false. I'm seeing some shaking. I'm seeing some people aren't shaking yet. Okay, more shaking. That's good. This is false. What about false and false? Nod if you think it's true, shake if you think it's going to be false. I'm seeing shaking, good, this is false. True and true. Nod if you think it's going to be true, shake if it's going to be false. Good, I'm seeing nodding, this is true. We're now going to look at the OR operator. So OR is different to AND. So true or false, this only requires that one of the two things be true. So true or false returns me true. True or true is true because one of them, at least one of them is true. False or false, well, that's false because neither are true. I need at least one of them to be true. False or true, well, yeah, great. Okay, so the first one wasn't true, but the second one was. And so the overall thing, false or true, comes out as true. So we're going to do the same again. Nod if you think this is going to be true, shake if it's going to be false. I'm seeing shaking, good, that's false. Whoops. That's, of course, what I meant. Let's try... Nod if you think it's going to be true, shake if it's going to be false. I'm seeing nodding. Some people not being very decisive. Make the nods more obvious, Beaks. Commit to the nod. Good. Nod if it's going to be true, shake if it's going to be false. Good, strong nodding. Excellent. We're gonna, yeah, okay. You get the idea of that then. So that's the, in fact, let's do a, I'll park that. We'll come back to that sort of thing later. But that's the idea of, as a teacher, this gives me this does a few things. So firstly, I can see who's engaging, gets me a clearer idea of well, I can tell if someone's just sitting there not doing anything, I know they're not engaging. If they're nodding, shaking their heads in the right moments, then I can see that something's going on, they're actually engaging. Then I can also get a nice snapshot of okay, I can see that pretty much everyone's nodding or pretty much everyone's shaking, or oh, there's some mixture of this one. So it's actually a very good way of giving you a quick summary of how the class as a whole are doing. But then a limitation of that sort of nodding, shaking is necessarily it's quite binary. So you can get some things which are not as binary out of it. So for example, let's skip ahead. Let's assume that we've looked let's assume we've looked at if-else statements and console log. And now I want to confirm that we can do this. So I'm gonna also assume that we've done numerical comparison. So let's assume we all know those things. If 3 is good for 4. So I reckon one of these numbers is going to get logged out. I don't know which. Can you show me your fingers? 1 to 3. What do you think is going to get logged out when I run this? I see some 2s, mostly 2s. Some people still thinking, that's fine. More 2s coming up. Some still thinking. Yeah, we're getting with 2s. Yeah, so this, let's run, let's see. And indeed, 2 is locked out. Great. Let's try something else. This time, I want you to put in the Zoom chat, what do you think is going to be logged out when I run this? I see a nice dinosaur emoji from Dom. Chris, I guess the cat and snake is meant to be a dinosaur together or something, but dinosaur. Yeah, we're getting some dinosaurs. Good. So let's check. Let's run this. Indeed, dinosaur gets logged out. So whereas nodding, shaking is clearly binary, you can do this sort of everyone writes in a way where you get sort of not binary output, but it is still relatively simple output. So it's not necessarily either or the other. It could be written output, although it's still relatively simplistic in what you're getting back. It's not super sophisticated. So what if you want to test on a little more kind of complex skill, such as like, okay, they can now, I'm convinced they can read an if statement, but can they write an if statement? What might that be? So I might then set a task, which it's not exactly that, but I might set a task where I require everyone to do this, and I ask everyone to do it, and then I solicit output from everyone. So for example, I'm going to say something like instructions are write an if and else if statement, and what I want, I want to have 3 branches. I want to see that you've got 3 branches included, and when you run it, output should be, let's go for hello world, but then branches shouldn't contain the same code. So firstly, in terms of how clear is this? Give me a nod if you think you understand what I'm asking. Give me a shake if the instructions are not clear to you. I'm seeing some shakes and nods. So let me try and write this again. So I'm going to go for I'm going to show you one way I might do this. So I'm using this to mean one branch. Mark, how many branches do you think I would say this has? 4. Good. And one of the things I said was that branches are not allowed to use the same code. Can you give me a nod if you think this passes that test, and give me a shake if you think it doesn't pass that test? So the test, which I'm saying branches must not use the same code. Nod if you think this is okay, shake if you think it's not okay. I'm seeing some shakes, I'm seeing some stationary heads. Okay, I'm gonna go to, so let me go to Dom. Dom, you're shaking head, can you tell us why doesn't this pass that test?
Because line 2 and 4 are the same.
Good, thank you, Dom. So here, what I mean is like, yes, so 2 and 4, these inside those branches, they've got the same code, so this doesn't pass that test. Let me try changing. Nod or shake your head, does this pass that test of like branches are not allowed to use the same code? I'm seeing nods. Nod or shake your head, does this pass that test? I'm seeing some nods, some shakes. Nods more, seeing some stationary heads. So, and nods can be said, indeed, this does pass that test. Nod, shake your head, does this pass that test? Lots of shakes, good. So, that task then was 3 branches. I want output when you run to be hello world, and no repeating of code between branches. I want you to all have a go at writing that if statement. And once you've done that, in fact, I don't want to put anything in the Zoom chat yet. I want you to write it. It won't be easy to write it directly in the Zoom chat, because I think when you press enter, it will just send it straight through, although it might work if you press shift enter, I'm not sure. So you might need to write it somewhere else in Slack or just some random text editor. I am going to give you 1 minute to write something. Don't put anything in the Zoom chat just yet, please. Had about 30 seconds. Can you give me a nod if you think you have an if statement which is ready? Seeing a few nods. Okay, I'm going to give another 30 seconds. Just final 10 seconds. Okay, so if you have that if statement ready, can you now paste that in the Zoom chat, please, and send that through? So I see Mark has 3 branches. Indeed, that's going to output hello world. No duplication. Leroy also has 3 output hello world. Chris, he's carefully avoided saying Chris sucks, and he's got a nice hello world. Sergio, he's got 3 nice comparisons looking at colors, and it's locking out hello world. Nick, so Nick, I want you to check compared to then Dom has sorry the motion sickness, the reference, but indeed it is outputting hello world. So I think Nick is having it and carried away indeed. But that now indeed has the right number of branches, and it is saying hello world. Fantastic. Thank you. So that is just strategy of like everyone writes. Actually, that text isn't quite exactly what I've just done, but the idea then being essentially we've got 2 ways of getting like mass interaction, mass feedback, where I can check 2 things. I can check A, are they engaging? B, are they listening to what I'm doing? So you've got that, like firstly, like visual stuff, which is maybe nods, shakes, might be like 1 to 3 or something like that. It might be putting simple things, relatively simple things in the chat, like a single word or whatever, but as well as like more complex tasks, which might require them to take some time to think. So it's not something they can just immediately do, like, oh, just nod. You know, they need to separately, you need to give them some time to write it separately, but then you can solicit the kind of input from everyone. And then if they know to expect that in advance, they know to expect that they're gonna have to put something in the chat, then it's sort of like, right, I've got to actually do this because I'm gonna have to share something here later. Whereas the sort of cold call and things like that, it's easier for someone to be a passenger inadvertently and sit out. And then something else, which I think important when you're doing these sorts of things, which I see sometimes missing, is this idea of narrating contributions. Because everything we're doing here is trying to communicate that to the students, you know what, your participation matters. This isn't one of those things, you just sit on a webinar and you're passive and you just do nothing and that's all fine. No, actually, you need to be actively engaged. And it makes a difference what indications you give me. And so that's why this sort of like things like, oh, okay, so I see lots of nodding, or I see some shaking, just to show, oh, actually, I'm doing something and something's now happening as a response. and going through and being like, oh, I see Nick's done X, Y, Z, whatever. It's that simple acknowledgement of, hey, I did something and something happened, you know, so it matters that I'm here. So, you know, it's sort of like, sometimes when you're doing it, it can feel a little odd when you start doing it. But like, I can't, you know, speak for any, but certainly like, I now know that like, I've sometimes sat on sessions where I've been asked to present on Zoom chat and I do, and then like no reference gets made to it at all. And I'm like, well, why did I bother? You know, and I actually feel like quite bitter and sore. So just to kind of recap then, there's sort of three things I've tried to kind of give you as ways of trying to build this kind of engagement from everyone. So this idea of call and response, everybody writes, and narrate contributions. Firstly, call and response. I want you all to take, I'm going to give you 1 minute, just type something out in the Zoom chat. Don't send it just yet. But type something out in terms of like, what do you understand by call and response? So I'm giving you about 1 minute, type something out in Zoom chat. Don't send it just yet. Got about 30 seconds left. Fifteen seconds. Okay, if you think you've got something that's ready, can you start sending that through into a Zoom chat, please, now? So it's this idea of like call and response, what are we trying to do? So inviting responses from all attendees as the same, which is good because kind of getting everyone engaged. And Natalia responding together and noting the difference between remote and physical. Physical's chanting, remoting is just in chat. P. Sherlock, getting more data points I really like because it's sort of like we soliciting that sort of blanket, like everyone's going to do something. And so it can be body language, like the nodding, shaking, like Sergio says. Don's mentioning multiple students, and we're chatting a whole class, like Mark says. And it is a bit like sort of music as me call and response. So it can become like that ritual where you can kind of like, in music, you kind of get used to it and you come to expect it. And if you do lots of call and response, like, you know, the nodding, the shaking, you kind of build out a vibe and a rhythm, which is quite nice. And then Nick and Chris both picked out like teacher asked and then everyone responding together. Indeed, Chris highlighting benefits, stop people to respond. And I really like Shukri, it's sort of like, you see what students say in response, but I think the Leroy is an idea in particular as well, that we're encouraging as many students as possible, because that's really the art of what we're trying to do here. Get that blanket participation. And simultaneously, which Neil is emphasizing, I think is really important, where if you can imagine the call response, like it doesn't work as well if people can just copy what other people are doing. Then it's nice, they can still free ride. One of the things we're trying to do is trying to get around that idea of free riding to make sure people are actually engaging. Everybody writes, it's different to call and response. I'm going to ask a question, it's going to be yes or no. I want you to nod if yes, shake if no. When I just asked you to kind of try and define call and response, can you nod if I asked you to define call and response using call and response? Shake your head if I asked you to define call and response using everybody writes instead. I'm seeing some take. So that's nod if call and response matched call and response. Shake if call and response matched with everybody writes instead. So I'm seeing some shakes. This one, it's a bit cognitive overload. So some shakes, some not sure. So I see a very confident shake from Neil. Neil, can you tell us behind the shake what's going on in your head?
I'm barely holding on to the inception of the question, Richard. So we didn't all chant out the answer at once when you asked the question. That would have been call and response. We waited, everyone had a chance to prepare their thoughts, write them down and then say them. You asked for them all to come together.
Thank you, Neil. So Neil was saying that the important difference being it wasn't this sort of immediate, like now something's happening straight away. There's a bit of time lapse and then people were like typing something, which is more symptomatic of everybody writes rather than call and response. I see a question from Don.
Yes, no, it's more of an admission than anything. I struggle to process the question, so I just did what Chris did.
Yeah. Okay, so it was quite a tricky question. Sorry, it's like a bit of like mind-bending inception. Let's go for. So I'm going to ask you to. It's going to be a nod or shake question. This question I'm asking you, frame through nod and shake. I'm asking about everybody writes. So can you shake if this is not everybody writes? Nod if it's nod. Shake question is not. Sorry. Nod if what I'm asking you to do is everybody writes. Shake if it's not everybody writes. So am I asking you to do everybody writes? Nod if I'm asking you to do everybody writes. Shake if I'm not asking you to do everybody writes. I'm seeing shakes. Yeah, it shakes. So yes, thank you. So this is a call and response that I'm actually doing here, the kind of nod shake. So it's a slightly twisted, like they ask like perverse questions. These are not good questions, but what I'm doing is kind of getting into the slide. I should be using them. Finally then, narrate contributions. What is narration contributions? Why is it important? Again, I'm going to give you another minute to think about that and start having answered which you typed out ready, but don't send just yet. Got about another 30 seconds. About another 10 seconds. If you can tell me about narrate contributions, can you put that in the Zoom chat, please? So Nick's saying out loud, giving validation that's worthwhile and it's noticed, and quick feedback. That's good. So like it's quite hard sometimes, but it's sort of like if you can, some things might like you might want to elaborate a bit on. Others you might just want to acknowledge, but not have much more to say. So I think that's a great nuance. And indeed, like Mark said, it shows people are interested. Repeat clearly. I think sort of repetition just to show that you actually are engaging with it, exactly like Shukri is saying. And as Neil's saying, it's rewarding participation because it's just sort of like, you know, I see what you're doing, it matters. And it's indeed like for saying, as I'm doing it, as I'm reading these answers. And so like Leroy said, it means I can give positive comments. And like Natalia, using names, not something I've explicitly said, but it's when you're acknowledging like, hey, you, I'm speaking to you right now. This is your individual attention. P Sherlock, and it's kind of like, yeah, highlighted, read out loud means I'm doing. And it signals, as Hannah's saying, that I've registered that, and I'm encouraging that effort. And it's, as you're saying, there's also that quick, like little bit of feedback, which you might give. Fantastic. So overall then, key takeaways, which I think we have down is this idea of like these call and responses might be nods and might be gestures. It might be emojis for like Zoom voting or Slack emoji voting. I've been using a Zoom chat But you could also use Slack threads instead. And I would actually generally prefer to use Slack threads, or I've been using Zoom here for the kind of mass contributions when everybody's writing. And just make sure that you're following both of these up with the kind of acknowledging that people are nodding, shaking, writing, and things like that. So to wrap up, I want you to, I'm not going to ask everyone actually to post things here, but I'm just going to ask a couple of people to share. So I want you to reflect on these 3 questions here. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to think about this, and then I'm going to choose a couple of people just to share back what their thoughts are after this. So thinking, you might want to write something just to kind of distill your thoughts. You don't have to. About 1 more minute. I'm going to be asking a couple of you to share back your thoughts after the end of this minute. Another 30 seconds. Final 10 seconds. Okay, so Shukri, could you take yourself off mute and tell us what your thoughts are?
I think they're all engaging in up to a level, because whether it's in a groups, you have to shout out the answer, or an individual has the answer. It all makes the students be on the edge to, or be ready to answer a question, and therefore it makes them pay attention to what you're saying, because there might be a chance that they might have to answer the question. So in essence, it is engaging, but some are more in a group sense and others are in a more individual.
So thank you, Shukri. So something which is important there, I think, is this idea of like making sure students are ready. Like if you build in this idea of like lots of frequent touch points, like there's just, you know, we're going to be doing lots and lots of nodding, lots of shaking, meant to sort of like, right, wow, I better be alert. So Shukri, I'm interested, like next time that you are in some sort of like, you know, teaching environment or TAing, or what do you think might change, or what might you try out after this?
I would definitely ask the students to write as a group on the chatting or Slack, and also try to shout out the answers.
Right.
And at the same time, also the cold calling, making sure that some of the quiet students have opportunity to say something at least.
Thanks so much, Shukri. So some really nice practical things to go away and try. I'm going to go to Hannah as well. Hannah, you take yourself on mute, tell us what your thoughts are.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can. Thanks, Hannah.
Okay, lovely. I cannot turn on my video because my internet connection is very unstable, so that's why I don't have a video. But yeah, so my thoughts on this are that yeah, I just want to make sure that as many people as possible are involved in the learning process to maximize the learning effect, and also to make sure that everybody is like socially engaged as well within a learning environment. So we don't want anybody to feel isolated, but we don't want anybody to feel that they're being put on the spot a lot. So, and yeah, I think I would, like in a teaching environment, I would test different methods depending on the learning group and see which work best. And also implement them, as I think we've mentioned this earlier, as rituals, so students know what's happening next, and they know that they they have to get ready and engage in the situation.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So some things which I think are really important from that is I really like this idea coming across of building that inclusive classroom. We want everybody to be a part of this, and actually, like, participation is a real meaningful way of, like, you are a part of this classroom because you are participating the same way that everyone else is participating, and you're all equals in that sense. You know, everyone now is all engaged in this, like, sort of like the same task, the same, like, all contributing the same way, all nodding, or shaking, whatever. I really like as well this kind of idea of testing, which I think is super important. This idea, you know, like, all the things which I'm giving you are things which you're very much encouraged to try, not as sort of like necessarily like biblical, like you must do this, but definitely try. And I really like that testing word for that. And then finally, the rituals, because I think something which can happen quite quickly is even just within the space of like a single lesson where it's like, oh, okay, we're nodding, like I'm now used to this after doing it a few times, or oh, now we're doing the writing thing. Yeah, I've done this a few times, I get the drill now. It can very quickly become kind of almost second nature and like a meaningful ritual in that sense. Which is almost then this mark as well belonging to that classroom. Like, yeah, I'm part of this classroom because we have certain rituals that we do here, which I think is really nice and symbolic. So that is, I think, pretty much what I wanted to say. Is there, yes, I'm happy, but I will also take any questions if anyone has any. Okay.
Would you ever use the online quiz type question, so you can do a multiple choice, so you can just move it on to the next question each time if you prepared it all, and then you can see who's getting them all wrong, rather than just the odd one, or whether it's slowly getting higher proportion that you're clearly lecturing over the top of the heads of them all, so you know to go back.
I think this is a good question. I like the idea which you mentioned there, Mark, of kind of collecting, because definitely with like call and response, like something, you know, it's quite cognitive demanding to do actually, because it's kind of like you have a look and I can tell at a picture, overall it looks like people are nodding, or overall it looks like it's a mixed response. It is quite hard as a teacher to track from multiple ones. Oh, I see that this person in particular is consistently like getting it wrong. You might spot that, but it's not like super obvious. It doesn't like rise through necessarily. So in terms of like using online quizzes, like I guess, so something like Kahoot is a way of kind of like, you know, it's a nice way where everyone's participating. You get some kind of detailed feedback. As you've alluded to, it does require that you kind of have more kind of setup involved, but you can do that in advance. So I think Kahoot, things like Kahoot are nice. Scenarios in where I tend to use call and response. Often I'm actually just improvising, like, because basically whilst I'm teaching, I'm thinking like, okay, I've taught this a little bit, like, did they get it? I'm not sure. So I basically on the fly figure out what is it I want to test. And then I quickly come up with a question to try and test that. And then I ask that question. Now, obviously, then you can be like much more adaptable to kind of a lesson as it's evolving, which might end up down unexpected rabbit holes, which don't necessarily fit this kind of Kahoot you've pre-planned. But I think there definitely is a place and a value to things like that. So I think that looks like that covered Nick as well. Happy to take any other questions. Okay, so I guess I'm done then.